right. So, what are we going to talk about today? So today's topic is to be true, or at least don't lie. There's a difference. There's a difference. So the Messiah comes as the incarnation of the truth. This is in the intro to the Cheonseong-gong. And just as God created through the Word, He recreates through the Word to complete His providence. The true parents have indeed come as the substance of truth and are fulfilling the sacred task of restoration. He, Reverend Moon, revealed the truth about God, humanity, the world, history, the spirit world, the identity of Satan, and all heavenly secrets. In other words, my brothers and sisters, we are building the kingdom of God on a foundation of truth. So, truth is central, and the Word represents the truth. But we are living in a society, and we as individuals have a hard time telling the truth. We have a hard time being true. In the ages past, I'm just taking a couple of Winston Churchill quotes. United wishes and goodwill cannot overcome brute fact. Truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but in the end, there it is. And we must look at facts because they look at us. In the Bible, St. Paul mentioned that the problem in previous ages is that they traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshipped and served things God had created instead of the Creator Himself. In the book of Numbers, I want to talk about next is a story in the Bible where the Israelites were trapped in the wilderness for 40 years. And it's not that far. It doesn't take that long to go from Egypt to Israel, even back in those days. But they took 40 years to make that trip across the desert. And turns out that there was a reason for that. And the reason was they were not being true to themselves. They had a perception of reality that was not in line with God. And so, when they were told to spy out the land, they took 41 members from each tribe. They went out into Canaan and they looked around and they came back and gave a report to their fellow members in front of Moses. And 10 of the 12 gave a faithless report. And you can recognize the language of people who are feeling negative about something, right? So they are stronger than we are, okay? They devour anyone. So exaggeration, hyperbole, it's hyperbole is not dead. We see a lot of it in the political discourse today. The people there are huge people. Okay, they're giants. Exaggeration. Okay, and we look like grasshoppers next to them. There's no chance. So this kind of faithless report. What do we see when our media sources in today's world are reporting situations like that? How does it make the population feel? Does it make them feel good? Does it make them feel powerful? No, the opposite. People are in despair. People are in despair. If you were to take a litmus test of the general mood in society nowadays, you would have to agree that it's pretty negative. Even though we're living in the most blessed time in history, okay? Even the poorest person in America today drinks cleaner water than the Pharaoh of Egypt. They live in a more comfortable environment than the Pharaoh of Egypt did. you have an air conditioner on the wall. When it's too hot, you don't have some guy fanning you, right? Okay, and all that does is fan you. It doesn't take the humidity out of the air. All right, it's still uncomfortable being a pharaoh in Egypt in the middle of summer, but in your 6x8 room, you can turn on the air conditioner and you can feel more comfort than I'm sure the emperor of Egypt felt.
That's right.
But how does that translate into human happiness? Are we happier? Not necessarily. Okay? Because happiness is something more elusive than just what you have in your life and what you don't have. So here are the Jews. They've just been rescued from Egypt. Are they showing any gratitude? Nope. Are they showing any faith in the people that are leading them away from slavery? Nope. So the whole community began weeping aloud when they heard these reports. Okay, this is the effect that negative opinions have on people. We're so susceptible to them. And they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only, this is amazing. This is the amazing part. If only we had died in Egypt. Okay, that's the comparison. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness. They would prefer to just die. That's how much their minds were suffering. And they began to resent the leaders because of how they felt. So here's the faithful report from Joshua and Caleb. The land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. Both parties agreed with that. The negative camp and the positive camp. They both agreed, yes, it's a great place to live. But here's the difference. Don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. And in response to that positive view of life, what did they want to do? They wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb. So this is a very typical human response. When somebody has an opinion different from yours, and they're positive and you're feeling very negative, you just want to crush them and bring them down. We see that today. It was true then as it is now. Very typical human response. And Moses had to intervene to stop God from, it seemed to be a very different God back then, but, God goes through stages, I guess. But Moses had to intervene to stop God from punishing the Israelites. So, fast forward to Jesus, okay? Jesus' time, he's talking about human freedom. He's saying, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Okay? So, here are the Jews. Now, most of them are still living with this negative mindset, but their view of truth has become so warped that they've even forgotten their history. Here's their response. We are Abraham's descendants. We have never been slaves to anyone. That's an amazing statement. For a people that had been in slavery for over 400 years, it didn't take them long to forget that and to think or imagine or change the truth about their past and think that, oh yeah, we were never slaves to the Assyrians. We were never demolished by the Babylonians. We were never held captive in Egypt. No, none of that ever happened. We've never been slaves to anyone, So that's a pretty amazing statement of self-denial. How can you say that we will be set free? And then Jesus' response, truly, truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. So, here's a quote from Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist, psychiatrist, making the rounds today, giving people hope, and telling them, above all, to be true and to be honest. And he became famous for speaking the truth when he realized that his country had gone off the deep end as far as policies were concerned. And they were dangerously verging onto dictatorship. And he comes from Canada. So he says, to tell the truth is to bring the most habitable reality into being. Truth builds edifices that can stand 1,000 years. Truth feeds and clothes the poor and makes nations wealthy and safe. Truth reduces the terrible complexity of a person to the simplicity of his word, so he can become a partner rather than an enemy. Truth makes the past truly past, makes the best use of the future's possibilities. Truth is the ultimate, inexhaustible, natural resource. It's the light in the darkness. I just want to read a story from, in his book, 12 Rules of Life. He says, I had a strange set of experiences a few years before embarking on my clinical training as a clinical psychiatrist. I found myself subject to some rather violent compulsions. None were acted upon, he says, and developed the conviction, in consequence, that I really knew rather little about who I was. And what I was up to. So I began paying much closer attention to what I was doing and saying. The experience was disconcerting, to say the least. I soon divided myself into two parts. One that spoke, and one which was more detached, that paid attention and judged. I soon became to realize that almost everything I said was untrue. I had motives for saying those things. I wanted to win arguments, gain status, impress people, and get what I wanted. I was using language to bend and twist the world into delivering what I thought was necessary. But I was a fake. Realizing this, I started to practice only saying things that the internal voice would not object to. I started to practice telling the truth, or at least not lying. Now there's a difference between the two, because we don't know what the truth is necessarily. We are so ignorant about reality. There's a lot of reality around us, and there's only a little bit of us with our limited experience on this planet. But at least we should be true to our conscience. So in other words, there is a difference between someone who's very much ignorant and thinks that they're speaking the truth versus someone who's deliberately lying. But being truthful to ourselves requires a lot of discipline. So just to finish this quote, I soon learned that such a skill came in very handy when I didn't know what to do. What should you do when you don't know what to do? Tell the truth. So that's what I did my first day at the Douglas Hospital. So he goes on to explain some other stories about how he was dealing with people, especially paranoid schizophrenics, people who are very, very much cued into any kind of movement in your face when they're telling you something. They're looking for confirmation of their situation being the way it is. And if you try to hide from them, you will fail every single time. These people are not stupid, they're just paranoid. So in other words, they're very, very smart, but they just have a fear that the world is conspiring against them, and they're looking for any kind of cue to confirm that. So he goes on to explain how he was able, by looking at himself and stripping away any kind of arrogance and any kind of judgment, how he was able to engage people like that, and they were able to respond to him and respect him even though they were telling him some pretty chilling thoughts. So I thought that was a really good explanation of how we have got to act. If we're trying to build a kingdom of heaven on earth, it has to be on a foundation of truth and love. And if it's going to be a foundation of love, it has to be true love. So I feel that truth is fundamental to our happiness and the future happiness of this world. When in Romans, St. Paul is talking about trading truth for a lie, that's what we see happening in today's world. People, in many cases, have tried abandoning religion, but they talk about the God void nowadays. What's replacing the void that religion occupied? Well, they're filling it with all kinds of nonsense. And people are really lost as a result, because they're trying to create their own truth rather than observing the reality around them, the universal truths, and then complying with the universal truths. Like if you were to go to a foreign country, they might not drive on the right side as we do in America. And if you don't observe that truth, that very simple truth, then you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble when you're crossing the road looking the wrong way, or when you get into a car and start driving somewhere. So paying attention to the universal principles is fundamental to our happiness and our safety and our existence. But we don't do that. We're so arrogant. We're so tuned in to some kind of concept, and we stick to that concept through thick and thin, and then we try to judge the world through that axiom. And it doesn't work that way, because the world is complex, and we are very limited in our knowledge. And so we had better understand that everybody that we meet has something to teach us. And yet we have this arrogance like, no, I know it all. I know, more than you do, and you're wrong and I'm right, and we don't learn anything. We go bumping around. So what are we trading our truth for? And how much is our truth keeping us in chains like it was the Jews in the desert? It kept them in chains far longer than they needed to be, because they were out of Egypt within a few days. Once they had gone through that tunnel of water, right, and the Egyptian chariots had all been smashed up, they were pretty much free at that point. No one's pursuing them physically, but mentally they were not free. They were not free. It took another generation to come up for them to be finally free of the shackles of the old way of thinking, and to unite with Joshua and Caleb and to go into Canaan and take back their land. But that took a whole generation. It didn't have to be that way. Joshua and Caleb belonged to the first generation. Moses belonged to the first generation. But mentally, most people were not there. They were not free. So that's the reality we're living in today, is that we're living in the freest land in history. We don't have hordes of Mongols, smashing through the barracks. I just finished reading a book on world history, and I just feel so grateful at the end of it that I don't live in an age when those poor people lived in, when you're just trying to, grow your corn and mind your own business, and then a horde of Vikings come in and just pillage your whole town and destroy everything, and then you're like, okay, pick up where we left off, rebuild the house, and then the next thing that happens is a horde of Mongols come in and just destroy everything, and then you're like, if you're lucky to survive, you have to pick up the embers and the ashes and keep going, and then the next thing that happens, another horde comes in, another horde, and it's just perpetual war and slaughter, and just, it was just a very, very sad time to live. But we're not living in that time period. I wonder what those people in that time period would trade to live like we do now. Like, you guys are so lucky. You don't have to look over your shoulder every moment of the day waiting for, the people to come. You don't have to worry about the security of your family and so on and so forth. And yet, it doesn't necessarily translate as happiness. So, I have a tendency to lie. And it's good that I'm married to the woman I'm married to, because her, let's just call it her bullshit detectors, are on full alert these days. And so when I lie to myself and to her, she can pick up on it real well. And she helps me to see it. And then that really helps me to understand, oh yeah, that was not true. And to work on myself. Because that's really fundamental. If I can't be true to myself, if I'm putting a false image into my own brain and trying to convince myself, yeah, that's the truth, that's what happened, that's what I did, that's why it happened, then I'm not going to be able to learn from my mistakes. Because every time I make a mistake, I'm just brushing it over. Like, oh, the reason I was late, oh, it's because of the traffic. Well, guess what? If I was being told, hey, James, I'm going to give you $1 million if you arrive at this time, at this place on time. Would I be late? I would be camping out there the night before just to make sure I was not going to be late. So the reason I'm late has everything to do with me and zero to do with anything or anyone else. It's not my fault. My gosh, how many times have I said that? There's nothing I can do about fill in the gap. My mother loved my sister better. You know, there's so many excuses for us being the way we are. We can make up a plethora of excuses, but what good does it do at the end? How much can we learn at the end? How much can we grow if we make excuses? We can't excuse our way to growth. We can't excuse our way to perfection. Oh yeah, we're good at it. We can lie and we can get away with it for a while. But ultimately, the universe doesn't let us get away with it. It holds us back. I remember reading one learned teaching, I think it was the Buddha or someone like that, who said that, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, that the tree, the tree, they grow naturally, but human beings can say no to growth. We can say no to growth. Like, of course, our physical body is going to get older and eventually perish. But morally, artistically, emotionally, spiritually, all those inner, internal, invisible aspects of a human being, that is up to us to feed, to grow, to put water to feed and grow. And if we decide not to, then guess what? We're going to be an adult, we're going to be a child in an adult's body, basically. We're going to be an underdeveloped, 50-year-old man giving sermons with a 12-year-old outlook on life. That's what we're going to be, Until we start telling the truth to ourselves and to each other, we cannot grow. We're stuck. We're stuck in our lie. We're stuck in our, baggage. And God will lead you to difficulty. In the Bible, it talks about how Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. What? God led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted? To go through hardship? Yes. God will lead you into difficulties in order to help you get to the next level. So if you think that a life of religion or a life of spirituality is going to be easy, you've been lied to. It's not. It's the opposite of easy. But why do people go through it? Because the fruit is so worth it. Why do people risk their lives for love? Because the fruit is so worth it. Even fake imitation love, people will risk their lives for that because that is, in their mind, worth it. Because they don't know what true love is. But the trade-off is that we have to go through difficulties in order to grow. So, in what way are we lying to ourselves?
Everything.
Yeah, we're stuck in our story, aren't we? We create a story as we go through life. We create a story. But the problem is, then we get stuck in it. If you get stuck in your story, what do you need? You need a new editor. What are you filling your mind with every day? For me, I'm slightly addicted to the news. But what is the news? Nowadays, especially, the news is a bunch of guys sitting around the table going, hey, got all this information, we know what's going on. What are we going to tell people about? Which part of all this are we going to tell them? And how are we going to tell the story? Right? So it's almost like, in today's political world, it's almost like, I don't think Netflix has a funnier show on Netflix than what's going on politically in America today. I think it's like a live stream, 24/7 reality TV show. And it's hilarious. I mean, in many ways, you either cry or you laugh. I choose to laugh because it's just hilarious. And again, the news cycle in America is provided by a few people at the very top who are deciding what you hear about. And they're shaping the news, not telling it. So if that's your source of reality, then I'm sorry, but you're being lied to 24/7. So it's important for you to think about, what are you putting in? What are you putting in? Why are you filled with anxiety in an age when there's so much blessing around you? It's because you're putting in wrong information. It's got to be wrong. It doesn't match up to the reality of the world you're living in. We're living in a blessed world. So it's important for us to think about doing some spiritual exercise every day in order to feed our mind healthy thoughts and healthy realities. So in our church we have this habit? No, maybe not. We have this tradition of something called hunduke in the morning, where you read God's Word, you put that in your mind, and then you digest that throughout the rest of the day. And it's actually very helpful, because you start to see the world in a different way, in a more positive way, like God is working His providence now. This is not just something that happened 2,000 years ago. God is recovering this world. And the confusion you see around you, it's explained. Our church has a word for it. It's called last days. And in the last days, you see a lot of positive things and a lot of negative things. But if you're a newscaster and your job is to make money, what do you talk about? You talk about all the bad things. You don't talk about any of the good things. So if you're just going to news as your source of information of what's happening in the world today, you're going to be really depressed. Because you're just going to be fed all the negative stuff. You're not going to see any of the positive stuff. None. So it's important for us to realize where our truth is coming from. And it's important for us to be truthful to ourselves and not to lie. So, Old Testament, New Testament, the truth is valued above so many things. Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. So I put that in there because here I am giving a sermon talking about stuff. It's meaningless unless I follow it up with actions. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. What does that mean? It means you can't come back to God without being truthful. You have to be truthful to yourself and to each other. You, me, we. Sorry. The Lord detests lying lips, but He delights in people who are trustworthy. That's from the Old Testament. Sun Myung Moon points this out. There are many crooked lines and one straight line. Which is the line of truth? Why the straight line? Truth is always the shortest distance between 2 points. You cut through the bull. Go straight to the point. Yes, it might upset you. It might upset other people. Yes, envy may attack it. Yes, but in the end, there it is. In my opinion, we have not achieved peace. It is because people forget its most fundamental aspect. Before we talk about peace among nations, we must settle our peace with God. How do we settle our peace with God? By being truthful. By being truthful about who we are, and by being persevering to practice telling the truth to ourselves and to each other until we have made it second nature. Become that trustworthy person that God can rely on, that you can trust yourself. When you say something, you believe it, and other people believe it too. Once you create that healthy life cycle, then that will create the kingdom of heaven in your own life, in your family, and eventually, if we all start doing it, that will be the reality of the world we're living in. Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for reminding us of our condition and helping us to remember that we must resist the temptation to be untruthful to ourselves and to each other. Hiding ourselves, protecting ourselves in this kind of way because we fear the repercussions. If people were to know the reality of who we are, we feel trapped and we feel separated and we feel cut off as a result. Help us to open our hearts, open our minds, help us to reconnect ourselves with you by being truthful so that we can build ourselves to become people of integrity and show by example how the world can live a life like that. We thank you once again for never giving up on us. And we offer this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.